I probably have seen at least 100, maybe 150 CEO transitions. About half of them have gone badly.
Welcome to the Faith Forward Leadership Podcast, where we talk with leaders about how they cultivate a higher purpose in their companies today and perpetuate it beyond their tenure. I am delighted to have Steve Woodworth with me today. He is the author of Lost in Transition and the executive chairman of Masterworks. Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm glad to be here, Becca.
So you've had a 40-year career serving kingdom-oriented nonprofits and businesses. You served on the nonprofit side and now leading a business that has recently gone through a transition. So I'm excited to talk to you as the author of a book about transitions, now going through your own transition and how that process has evolved along the way. But before we get there, I'd love to hear a little bit of the backstory about how God has led you in your leadership journey from World Vision and serving in a nonprofit to building a business that serves a lot of nonprofits.
I became a Christian my last year in college, and my wife and I were a very radical conversion, both of us at the same time. And we decided we wanted to be missionaries. And I finished my business degree, and then we moved to California to go to Fuller Seminary. I didn't come from a Bible-oriented background at all. And we went to Fuller, and after one semester realized we can't make enough money to pay the tuition and living expenses here. So had a crisis of faith after one semester, like, what are we going to do? And our pastor told us about World Vision, which at the time was right down the road from Fuller. And he said, it's a big organization, it's mission oriented, and maybe they need somebody with a business degree. So I walked in the front door, filled out an application without any idea if there were any job openings or anything. And I got hired, and a few years later, I was in charge of all the fundraising for the U.S., for all the mass marketing and donor service and all that stuff. I started as an analyst looking at their treasure trove of data that they hadn't really mined. And that propelled me into the management of income programs, which then ultimately led to me being VP of marketing. And I spent 12 years there, traveled all over the world. It was really great. I had a deep disagreement with the CEO over strategy, and I realized that board members were picking sides, and I decided I can't lead a rebellion. I don't want to be an Absalom, so I'm just going to do what David did, and I'm going to avoid conflict. I'm just going to get out of here and do something else, and if God wants me back, I'll be back. And so I left, and I ended up at this little tiny company that serving a couple of Christian organizations in their fundraising. And I was bringing all this experience from World Vision. And I joined the small organization because one of my colleagues said that all the agencies have the same business model, and we would have loved to have had a little bit of a different business model. So go to that little one and build it into the agency that we would have wanted. And now we're the largest marketing agency serving Christian nonprofits. And
Wow.
that's just been an amazing journey that only God could do. I mean, only God could take a walk-on, she would say, in football, in college football, and end up being the starting, quarterback on the team, and then to leave there and start at this tiny little agency and build it into the biggest. There were less than 10 people when I joined, and there's 150 on our team now. So God has just really blessed me. It's been not a straight line, that's for sure. There's been a lot of bumps along the road in my career, but that's how I got to where I am. And
I love that. I love how God also used the business degree that you got and also that heart for missions that you and your wife shared led you to World Vision and then led you to now be a business that serves so many nonprofits that are focused on advancing the kingdom of God.
yeah, World Vision did feel like missions. I traveled all over the world because we had a need to really unify the fundraising and the program side. There wasn't a really strong bond there. So my wife and I actually served in Ethiopia during the famine there in 1985. We lived there for a few months and got to know the field people there, got to make really good friends that paid off later when we started building out our child sponsorship program. We wanted to accelerate the growth of it. And when the famine was ending and World Vision had been feeding hundreds of thousands of people, we turned that into a very large child sponsorship program, which helped propel our growth. And the staff there gave me the the credit for coming up with the idea. All I did was challenge them, like, we really have an opportunity to grow if we can help more kids. And can we do something here with all these people that we've been helping? And they came up with the program that World Vision still uses today, called an area development program model, looking at community development across wider areas of many villages that like would comprise an entire valley. And I was on the team that helped choose that as the ministry model for World Vision. So yeah, it's been a great ride. It's been the strangest missionary calling of anybody I've ever known of. But I do feel like, all of the things that I've done have been somehow related to either homelessness or evangelism or
Mhm.
teaching and discipleship or various aspects of God's mission.
And over the decades that you've been serving different Christian ministries and on boards and in other ways that you serve and connect with them, I know you've seen a lot of organizational transitions, leadership transitions in particular, and enough of them that went poorly that you wrote a book about it. Maybe there's a different narrative or way that you frame it, but I know Lost in Transition came out of seeing the pain of leadership transitions, especially in these kingdom-oriented nonprofits that didn't go well.
That's right. That's right. Yes. I figured I probably have seen at least 100, maybe 150 CEO transitions in the 33 years I've been doing what I'm doing now, plus a couple of them at World Vision. And I would say that about half of them have gone badly. And I started
Wow.
thinking about that. I started to be really pained about that about 20 years ago. Like, why do they go so badly? And then I discovered it's about the same in the secular world. McKinsey did a study and came to the conclusion that almost 50% go poorly, CEO transitions in secular for-profit companies. So you would think it'd be better in Christian organizations. And I started looking at what are the patterns of the ones that have gone badly and what's different between those and the ones that go well. And I was just thinking about it with a colleague one time in an airport, and he said, "You need to write a book on that." And I said, "No, I don't have time to write a book," and I just kind of put it away. But he came back to our agency and he had an artist do a book cover design with a handoff of a baton, and the title was Succession or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And I laughed at it, but you know what? I didn't throw it away. I put it on my desk, and that sat on my desk for 5 years. And I started to think more and more like I would do want to do that someday. And I was talking in 2023, the beginning of 2023. I was talking to Bill High, founder of the Signatory, and
Mhm.
I know you are friends with Bill as well. And he had been a good friend and he knew my company well. And he said, "You really need to write that book." And he said, "Brian, who was my successor that I was grooming to
Mhm.
ultimately be the CEO," he said, "I think Brian's ready for you to step back and take a good chunk of your time for this coming year, make it your top priority to write that book." And then what really hit me was he said, every year that you don't write that book, there are successions that could have gone well if people had only read your insights that are going to go badly. And
Wow.
I talked to Brian. Brian said, "Go for it. I'll cover the time that you don't have available because you're working on that." And then I began to interview leaders, giving them some of the principles that I thought, but then also bouncing that off them. Like, what else do you see in your transition? I purposely picked ones that have gone really well and ones that have gone really badly, and then the book that has those real stories. Of course, the bad ones we had to disguise because I don't want to embarrass the organizations, and even
Right.
the people that were felt they were treated badly didn't want to hurt the organization that they had left. But the reception of it has been very good, and I have had the grateful experience of having people tell me that they have changed what they're doing, and I've been asked to come and talk to, well, even just on Zoom, just asked to talk to a board chair or a few board members of multiple
Mhm.
organizations because they're stuck or they're
Right.
heading down a path that the CEO doesn't feel respected or things like that. And
Mhm.
I said if I had one like that, if I had one thing like that happen, it'd be worth writing the book. But I've had more than a dozen of those kind of experiences so far.
Wow. That's great, and I would just underscore, I do think certainly more work is needed. Few So few nonprofits and for profits, especially small and medium sized, this research shows they don't have adequate succession plans in place. And so, from our perspective, wanting to help them encourage, how do we seek the Lord, abide, and pursue a higher purpose in our business and our nonprofit and keep that going beyond our tenure? Well, all that work is lost in a single transition that goes poorly, whether it's an ownership transition or a leadership transition, or even board member transitions. So there's a lot at stake here, and still too few leaders and business owners are being thoughtful to think through those transition implications. So I think it is absolutely a timely work, and the case studies are very, very practical. And one of my big takeaways from it was just the importance of communicating early and often. Planning ahead does not mean that a leader is ready to leave at that moment. You should just always have plans in place. So it's not this awkward thing where you're pushing someone out or they feel like, the board's thinking, does this leader want to leave? No, it's just a best practice.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I feel like, like I said, the success rate's about 50%, but I think the success rate is more like 70% when it's somebody from the inside, or it's
Mhm.
an outsider that was brought in and groomed into the job for a few years. That those tend to go maybe even 80% success rate, because the
Mhm.
culture fit is a big deal,
Right.
and because the relationship between the incoming leader and the outgoing leader is a huge part of the success as well. Because the two things that blow up the most often is, number one, like boards just mess up and don't do a good job and don't understand what they don't know. And then the second thing is the outgoing leader feels disrespected and gets to a point where they feel like, forget this, I'm out of here. And then that the organization doesn't even realize what they're losing in terms of relational equity with donors, with key constituents, whatever ministry partners, if they have partnerships. And that happens a lot where the outgoing leader feels disrespected. And sometimes they actually weren't, but they just felt like it. And there wasn't good enough communication to help that outgoing leader feel respected. And now, as a person who's handed off my CEO role to my successor, I have a lot more compassion for those people. This is very hard. This phase of life is just hard to give up a big part of your identity, especially as a person who's a founder, or practically a founder, because you took something very small and God used you to grow it. It's hard to walk away from that. It's hard to walk away from the sense of accomplishment and then to kind of fade into the background, even when you've groomed your own successor. Like, I have worked with Brian Brown for over 5 years since I identified him as the likely person. We still have regular times where we communicate where I feel hurt by something he said, and we patch it up. And if I didn't keep coming back to him, I could easily see that I could just say, forget it. I don't want to do this. And I don't want to be involved anymore because it's just too hard. But every time one of those glitches happens and I talk to Brian about it, he then understands where I'm coming from, understands what I'm going through, explains to me where he was actually coming from, which is usually nowhere near as bad as what I thought it was. And we grow closer and our friendship is renewed. And then we have another honeymoon for a few weeks or a couple of months. And we go on and I continue to do everything I can to help him succeed. He wants my input, continues to bounce things off of me, and is more sensitive to what it is like to be in my shoes at that time.
Mhm.
And I'm also sensitive to how he's carrying a lot of stress because this is a new job. Being a CEO is a very different job than being a COO, which is where I started. Once I identified him, we put him in a COO position, and he's done an amazing job. He's far exceeded my expectations and my timeline, which is good. So I mean,
Mhm.
I should be celebrating that every day, and some days I'm not.
I would love to hear from you. You wrote a book on transition and now you're going through transition firsthand. What what have you learned or maybe had a new level of appreciation for now that you're, you know, more on the other side of the transition journey?
Well, what has surprised me the most is how hard it really is for the senior person. There's almost this phobic fear of being a dinosaur and being irrelevant. And I knew that and I wrote about it in the book, but to actually go through it and experience it has been harder than I even imagined. How hard it is also to be humble and to let go. David Ashcraft, who's now the leader of the Global Leadership Network, I talked to him when I was writing the book when he had stepped down from one of the largest churches in America that he'd been the pastor of for over 30 years. And he had groomed his successor for, I think, 7 years, 6 or 7 years, even having the guy get an advanced theological degree. And they had a plan and they worked together. And he tells this story on a podcast for Global Leadership Network. So I'm sure he wouldn't mind me telling it. And he let me use it in the book that on the first Sunday that he was no longer the senior pastor, he was there. And when the guy, Jason, his successor, walked onto the stage and the screen said, Jason, I can't remember his last name, your pastor, he thought, wait a minute, I'm the senior pastor. No, no, wait, I'm not. He said, it's like he said he went through this moment of confusion. And then the really telling thing was he said that he began to talk about a vision for some new things in the church. And I kept waiting for him to mention my name because these things were my idea and I had already raised the money for him. And he never mentioned my name and I felt really hurt. And he said, then I realized I've got to get out of here for a little while. I'm just being stupid. And he said, like, I'm sorry, Lord. I spent 6 years for this moment. I should be celebrating. And instead I'm hurting. And so he went to one of their satellite campuses for, I can't remember now, 6 months or a year before he came back to the main campus. And he does still, I don't know if now that he's the head of GLN, I don't know if he still does it, but he started doing some pitch in sermons, to
Yeah.
relieve his successor, and they had this great relationship, and he was no longer having that angst, but it took him a while to get over. It took him withdrawing somewhat. I have not withdrawn from Masterworks. I'm still full time, and I'm still on a journey of trying to figure out, can I do this? Can I slowly let he must increase, I must decrease? Can I keep doing that on a gradual, steady plane and continue to add the value that I can add with the network that I have and the relationships I have
Yeah.
for the benefit of Masterworks, or will it be too hard on my ego? And it's just a matter of humility. That's one of the principles I put in the book, that most of the things that go badly, it's because somebody's not walking in humility. They're letting their ego get in the way.
Wow. That's really important. How much humility matters. I think both in the leadership journey, but even maybe more so in that transition journey.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's one thing to be a leader and to be humble and dependent on God because you need guidance. It's another thing to walk away from your identity and what you've built, and to watch someone else do different things with it than you would have done, and you think that's my baby, and you're putting the wrong shoes on, or that kind of thing. But I would say Brian and I have as good a relationship as I've ever seen any two people have in this situation, where he's I picked him when he was 2 levels down because I thought he's a really special, smart, and relational guy, and I think that he is potentially the successor, and I won't ever know unless he reports to me, so I pulled him out and had him report directly into me, and I started the conversation asking him if he was interested, and he was, and I said, "Okay, then we have to talk about your management style because it's too harsh and it's not relational enough." He came from a hard driving secular agency background where people were laid off regularly to meet the numbers and things like that. And we're just not like that. I come from World Vision. My background is all ministry. So I'm trying to run a successful business, but with a ministry kind of background. We spent 2 or 3 hours on my back deck talking about my values and how they are expressed and how I lead people and how I value people. And in that very first conversation, toward the end of it, he said, "You know what, Steve? I think what you're describing is a Christian way of managing people and leading a company, and I want to learn how to do that." And to his credit, he did, and he kept asking me to hold him accountable every time I saw him doing anything that was violating that kind of value system. And it took a while. More than once, I said, maybe I should stop calling you out on these things because maybe you can't change. Maybe you can't
Mhm.
be anything like what I'm envisioning. And he insisted, no, no, I want you to call me out. I want you to keep calling me out. I really do want to change in these areas. And he did. He's become a relational leader as opposed to more of a transactional, financial, driven by numbers. That was where he came from. He was
Mhm.
responsible to hit his numbers, and if he didn't, he had to lay off some people every month. Yeah, I mean, it was a month to month thing.
Well, you had this leadership transition journey going on. And one of the reasons I interviewed you as part of Lead on Mission, as one of the case studies, was also the ownership transition that's happening almost at the same time. So I'm sure that contributes to why it seems so difficult. But I'd love to hear an update from there was a pivot in this ownership transition plan from even when I interviewed you for the book to today where God has led you and the ownership arrangement you have. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So just briefly, where I was when we talked, when you were working on your book, was that because we work for Christian nonprofits, we've never driven for profit. We're in this. The key people are in this for kingdom impact and missional alignment with our clients, and or that's what our clients want. Our clients want us to be on mission with them, not to be about making money. And that's a big part of how we've been so successful and why we've grown so much is that we really do want to be on mission with our clients, and they feel that, and they look at us as, like one recently told me, "You're not a vendor, you're a partner in our ministry." And I thought, that's my love language. And so we were exploring every possible way of changing ownership along. You're right. You're absolutely right. There's two big challenges: who's going to lead it and who's going to own it. And I thought they needed to be the same person. And so for multiple years, for decade or decade and a half, I was trying to sell ownership to the key employees, and it just kept not working out because you can't just give it to them. That's taxable income at ordinary income tax rates, and then you got to give them the money to be able to pay the taxes too. And we just didn't have enough money to do that. And so we struggled through multiple iterations until one of those people who was a minority owner came to me and said, "We keep trying to do this and it keeps not working. I'd rather just get my bonus every year. I've got kids in college." And I said, "Would you talk to your peers and see if everybody feels that way?" And it came back that, yeah, everybody felt that way. Everybody felt like they didn't care about the ownership. It was so far off, and it was so nebulous as to whether after they paid into it, would they ever be able to get paid off, that they would much rather just take current bonuses. So then back to square one. Then I met through Bill High, who I already mentioned, our mutual friend. He introduced me to David Green, and probably 5 6 years ago, I was going to be in Oklahoma City. David Green is the founder of Hobby Lobby, for those in your audience who might not know. And years ago, the Green family gave away 99% of Hobby Lobby into a trust that is organized just to give money away to Christian ministries. And he described how he went through that process and how freeing it was and how exciting it has been to be able to give the profits away each year.
Mhm.
And he planted a seed that started to grow for me. And I talked to my wife about it on and off. And finally, we started to think, we needed to get a financial planner and figure out, could we live without the money from selling the company? We had never really looked at that. Could we keep our house? Could we retire at some point if we didn't have anything for from the company? The financial planners came back and said, yeah, you got like a 90% chance of not running out of money until you're 90 years old. And so we decided to give it away. And we started out by giving 20% of it away with the intention of giving all of it away. But the wanting to get the tax deduction for the value of it spread out over our lifetime. So doing it in pieces. And after we'd given the 20% away, the leader of the organization that we gave it to called me and said, "I've been praying a lot about your situation, and I understand why you're doing what you're doing. You want to make sure it stays focused on Christian ministries. And almost all of our competitors have drifted away from that, and then they've lost their way, or they've even gone out of business. several of them, when they started being driven by an outside owner for profitability. So he said, I've been praying a lot about it. And even though it makes sense right now, because he said, I know Brian's the right guy, but I'm not confident that we're qualified to pick his successor or the successor after that.
Mhm.
I don't know what the future holds. And he said, I think it would be more structurally built to maintain your missional focus if you were owned by a company that has the same DNA that you have. And that means one that's all about God's kingdom and about building the church. And in this case, he said, there's a company that has built its business around serving churches, and it's a for-profit like you. And it's because its constituency is all churches, they're very interested in expanding that to parachurch ministries, which is where we are and where our niche is. And he said, I've already talked to the founder and he wants to meet you and he's interested.
Wow.
So turned out that company was Glue, and that
Mhm.
founder was Scott Beck, who many people know of Scott, and they are serving. They've cobbled together a bunch of best in class service providers to help churches with everything related to technology and texting and all those kinds of services. Almost anything that a church needs to go to an outside vendor, they have bought some of the best in class companies and brought them together. And so as we began to hear this vision from Scott of keeping these companies together so they have synergy and so that there isn't an outside corporate entity that owns them. I mean, you probably know, Becca, that almost all of the Christian music companies sold out to secular companies, and almost all of the Christian publishers, book publishers these days are owned by secular big publishers. And he said, I just don't want that to happen in this world of serving churches and parachurch ministries. And I'd like to head that off by building this company called Glue, which he's been at for 15 years, Gloo. One of their staff jokes, we're really good at technology, but we're not good at spelling.
That's good. I like that.
Yeah. And so we got to know Brian, and I got to know Scott, and I promised Brian I'm not going to do anything unless you're 100% on board with it. I'm not going to sell it out from under you or something like that. You have to want to work with Glue or I'm not going to do this. And we went through a journey of just maybe 2, 3 months before we said we're interested. And they made us an offer. And as we talked to people who are experts in that field, they said this is a fair offer. And they also promised us that they wanted us to stay somewhat independent so that they would put a board between us and Glue, not try to absorb us into Glue where we're not even Glue employees. This whole thing came together and closed on July 3rd, and we're still employees of Masterworks, and Masterworks is still its own separate entity, and it has a board that's comprised of Glue people and me and Brian. And so I did not see that coming. And I don't think I could have even been open to it if it hadn't been that the leader, the CEO of the nonprofit that I was giving it to was the one who was telling me, don't give it to us. I think that this would be a better way. And he's
Mhm.
a very experienced business person in addition to now in his latter years of his career running this ministry that does things like this, has donor advised funds and things like that. If the message hadn't come through him, I think I would have thought this is just temptation. This is a
Yeah.
temptation to step away from the path that we felt led. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like this is a better way. It felt like and Brian still had the opportunity to stick with me and try to figure out a way to buy it over time. And we did even come up with a plan B because we thought rather than just go for this, let's figure out if this fell through, what's our plan B so that we have something to compare it to. And plan B would have had Brian owning the majority of it. And he decided he thought it was a better fit to be a part of Glue and that, he could see all the benefits that could come from the synergy from them. And so we're still getting to know each other. It's been 2 months and there's a lot of opportunities that we're excited about. And there's been nothing like the worst case scenario would be they swoop in and they said they weren't going to drive you for profitability, but now all of a sudden they're all over you to cut expenses. And there hasn't been anything like that. And that's been the word that we've heard from other companies that they have bought as well, that They call them capital partners. They don't even like to say these are acquisitions. These are our partners, and we're all in this together. And it's a great culture that Scott has built. We really like the people.
That's wonderful, and I think that's so important on the entrepreneurial journey, not just when you're transitioning, but as you're leading and on that journey, just that abiding, that sensitivity that the Lord might redirect you from something that seems very on mission and mission aligned to a different way of advancing that higher purpose over time through a different owner in this case. But just that importance of prayerfully seeking the Lord for his direction, even after you feel like you've committed to one direction, he may direct you elsewhere.
Yeah, especially when it seems more godly to give it away than to sell it, but it actually is much more, I think, feasible that our mission will remain intact for generations and our company will be successful. And it has financial backing now, which the nonprofit couldn't do. It couldn't co-sign a loan or anything like that. In fact, our own bank was reluctant to renew our credit line because we don't understand this partial ownership by a nonprofit. So that was difficult to work through. So I think it was the right thing. And I don't know why God leads in circuitous ways like that. My life has never been, and I don't think hardly anybody would say that theirs has been like a straight line. Like this is this is where I saw God leading me. And I just went from point A to point B over my lifetime. It's a whole bunch of detours and sinkholes and mud flats and all kinds of convoluted ways of getting to where you get. And then you look back and you see God's hand and I don't always feel like I see why did these hard, bad things happen, but yet I know that's part of growing me in my faith as well. I had to trust him through hard times. And even in our business, you get clients, you lose clients. And every time I lose a client, I feel I take it personally. I get discouraged for a while. And that's just the way life is. If we didn't have that, I think that it would be very difficult to trust the Lord if you didn't learn that through a lot of sequences of events where you had to trust the Lord. Then when you got to trust him for the big things, you've got some of those muscles already built.
That's so good. Are there any other like particular things you feel like the Lord's been teaching you in this season of transition?
He has been teaching me to hold it lightly and to not assume that my plan is ultimately going to be the plan. I mean, not just this change, but I'm thinking I would like to stay involved with Masterworks for years to come. I don't have the energy that I had 20 years ago, but I don't see where I can have more impact. And there are parts of what I have done over the years, so over the last over 30 years that I love to do, like help CEOs and be a strategic advisor and a safe place for CEOs to bring their problems. They can't usually talk to their board. They can't talk to their staff openly. One of the best CEOs I ever worked with told me it's really great to have you to bounce things off of, Steve, because if I'm thinking about something and I share it with the staff, they freak out. Somebody freaks out like that I'm thinking about this when I'm not, it's only half baked. And he said, when I talk to my friends, they don't understand and they don't care. They live in a different world and they don't want to try to figure out my world and in being a CEO of a nonprofit. So I took that to heart. That was like 25 years ago. And ever since then, I've probed with clients and with other CEOs I meet, like, are they looking for a friend who's kind of seen everything and can help them process whatever they're going through. And I have at any given time like 15 to 20 active friendships with CEOs of ministries, some who, want to spend a day with me whenever they can get a day with me, and others that I only see at conferences, but we share a meal or that kind of thing. And that's very rewarding. I'd like to do that for the rest of my life. And it works best, I think, under the banner of Masterworks and other things like that I think I can do under the banner of Masterworks. But I feel like the Lord has told me to not let that be my identity, because if he has something else for me, I need to always be open to that there could be a completely different path. Just like World Vision. When I left World Vision, I was heartbroken. I didn't want to leave, but I felt like I can't keep doing what I'm doing here, or I'm on the verge of leading a rebellion with a CEO that I don't agree with. And so I walked away, and God had this whole plan for me to help hundreds of organizations over the next 30 plus years. And I think
Mm.
that's far more impact than I would have had if I had just stayed at World Vision, in spite of what a great job that was and what a great organization.
Right. I know lately just talking with people, and I think this is the journey of life too. There's the death of something like that verse in scripture that unless that plant dies, then the seed is scattered. It's like the death of something brings new opportunity. I just want to highlight the fingerprints of God all over this story from, growing this entity to finding an aligned buyer for your unique, marketing agency. Remember you sharing with me how many of your competitors that also served Christian clients and Christian nonprofits ended up moving away from those markets.
Yeah, what we do works for anybody, and I've always said I wouldn't turn away Special Olympics or Make-A-Wish Foundation or somebody like that that's doing great work that is, really heartwarming and all that. But that's not who we're going to go after. We're going to try to keep our expertise focused on the Christian market, and it's been a great business strategy. It has kept us missionally aligned with our clients, and it's kept us focused on that particular niche. And not everybody is Christian in our company, and not every we have worked for clients, and we still at any given time we have a couple of clients that are not Christian organizations, but there are people that have worked at Christian organizations that know us and want us to help them. And so we're not averse to that. We're not saying no to those, but keeping mostly focused on Christian ministries is essential to the credibility of what we do and to the continuous learning, because like, we're learning now and have been since 2006 how to raise money online, but we're learning it with Christian donors and through Christian websites, advertising, and so forth. And so it's a key part of our ethos and who we are. And the four biggest agencies that had that as their focus when I first got involved in World Vision and ministry and began to work with other agencies, the four of them are the top four of them are gone. They have been either gone out of business because they lost so many clients so fast once they were driven for profitability and they weren't about the mission anymore, and they've lost key staff and so forth, or they were absorbed into a bigger entity and disappeared, and we don't ever run into them in the Christian space anymore. And of course, over the 45 years I've been in ministry, the culture has really changed. It's become much less attractive to people to deal with Christians, right? The brand of Christianity has suffered through the culture wars and all that. And it's been harder to keep that focus, be easy to say, well, we also work for all these other, you know, non-Christian nonprofits. But I feel like if we made that the point of our arrow, even for a few years to build our business up, it would risk the same thing where we would lose the missional focus. And that has been a morality tale, I guess, for me to see these other really good agencies that have gone away and they were doing great work. They did, I worked with two of them when I was at World Vision. They were great agencies and they're gone. Their former leaders that were leading it back then are pained too to see that the organizations lost their way and ultimately failed.
As you think through transition, now the ownership's transition, leadership's transition, you're still involved. What is the legacy that you hope to have from your life and your leadership and the work that Masterworks is doing?
Well, the legacy is in the people and in the values and culture of the organization. The strategy keeps changing. It's very different now than it was 10 years ago, even a lot more technology based. If I live to be 85 years old and I'm not working anymore, I hope that I can look at Masterworks and say, I am so happy for what it is today. And it's still serving organizations that are working for Christ and his kingdom. And that would be the legacy that I hope to see. I don't care if people remember who I am. Probably half the staff now barely know who I am, you know, especially because we've been all remote since 2020. The legacy is in the organization continuing to be a help to Christian organizations flourishing, whatever that looks like. It's gone beyond just raising money now too. It's about helping with their brand. It's about helping them with their culture. It's about helping CEOs with boards and things like that. So anything that an organization needs to help them flourish is what we are trying to be about, which has become much more than just fundraising. And I expect it to continue to move in that direction. And my legacy will be mostly in Brian, I think, and having got him ready for the job, been his mentor and been available to provide counsel to him.
Some closing word of advice, something that the Lord's taught you that you would give to other leaders that seek to cultivate and advance the kingdom of God in their work.
A couple things come to mind. One that is if you're a Christian in a leadership position, there's nothing wrong with ambition as long as that ambition is submitted to the Lord and to his will. And as long as you're prayerful about, Lord, what do you have for me? I want to have more impact. I want to do more, not necessarily work hard, but I want to have more impact. I want you to use me. That kind of holy ambition is what was a big part of my being able to step up and take on more responsibility. And many times the next level job is a lot harder. You think it's going to be easier. You think you have more control over your life. It's the exact opposite. And so being open to that and striving for more responsibility, but in a healthy way under the Lord's direction. And then also trusting him in that. Like there were times where I felt like there's a job that I really want. And I felt like the Lord told me, I don't want you to put your hat in the ring. I don't want you to tell anybody you want it. If I want you to have that job, you'll get it. And as a spiritual discipline, I kept my hands off. I didn't talk to HR. I didn't talk to the leaders that had an open position. I just kept doing my job the best of my ability. And I ended up in those jobs. And I felt like God was telling me, I can do things that you wouldn't have imagined that didn't need your help at all.
Mm.
In fact, there was one guy that was a rival of mine in my career for a long time. We were both kind of going up in responsibility at World Vision at the same time. And I was quicker than him. And I found that I was in meetings with senior leaders and I would get ideas and I would share them. And then he would later tell me, gosh, I had the same idea. Like right as you were starting to talk, I had the same idea. I felt like the Lord told me, and I don't hear audible voices or anything, and this is not a real common experience for me, but I felt like the Lord told me, I want you to, when you have an idea, I want you to hold it for 5 minutes and see if anybody else says anything about it. I want you to not use your quick process to throw your ideas out there before anybody else has a chance. Well, for the next 6 months, this guy kept having the exact same ideas within 5 minutes. And I kept thinking, darn, this is going to wreck my career, Lord. What are you doing to me? And he even noticed it. He came to me and he said, what's the matter? You're like not talking as much in meetings. And I said, I'm just trying to just chill a little bit and not hog the room. And so I put him forward. Then I felt like the Lord told me to help him with his presentations to senior staff because I was much more of a math kind of person and he wasn't. And I started helping him behind the scenes with nobody else knowing, do an analysis to back up the things that he was presenting. And nobody knew except me that I had helped him to do that. And we ended up becoming really close friends. And when I got promoted over him, he stayed and continued to work for me for the next 5 years that I was VP of marketing at World Vision. And he later became the head of our new business team at this agency. So we've mostly worked together for almost 45 years. And I feel like a big part of that was God telling me, like, don't step on him to climb over him, but support him and put him forward and help him. And I did. And we bonded as friends as a result of that. So just submit. There's nothing wrong with having ambition, but submit it to the Lord. And a daily quiet time is everything. I mean, I don't think I would be doing anything like I'm doing if I didn't have a really disciplined, rigorous daily quiet time of significant amounts of time that have grown through the years as I don't have little kids anymore, so on. But listening to the Lord and praying and reading the Word is I think absolutely essential in ministry to keep you on the right track, to keep you in God's will. I don't think you can hear God's voice if you don't regularly read his word. It's resonance, it resonates with the word. Trusting him is is hard if you're not regularly in the word and prayer. And trusting him with your life is the thing that most pleases him, right? We have to trust and we have to believe that he's a rewarder of those who seek him. That's how we please God.
That's so good. Thank you so much for sharing from this 45-year leadership journey and how you've been abiding in those practices of connecting with the Lord throughout your life and leadership. I just really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Becca.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope this was helpful in your leadership journey. On behalf of On Mission Advisors, if there's anything we can do to help you better define, protect, and champion what matters most in your company, please reach out and contact us. We'd be happy to help you as well. Until next time.